The first truck that arrived at the forgotten farm did not carry fertilizer, seed, or equipment. It carried lawyers, scientists, and executives in expensive suits. They stepped into the bright morning sunlight, holding folders marked with confidential research and contracts worth more money than anyone in the county had ever imagined. The same neighbors who had laughed at the young farmer only months before stood frozen along the roadside, unable to understand why one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies had traveled hundreds of miles to visit a boy everyone had called a failure. What they discovered hidden inside his worthless tobacco plants would forever change his life, and force an entire community to confront the painful cost of judging someone before believing in them. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Every act of support helps our community continue sharing inspiring stories that remind us compassion is always stronger than cruelty. Bright morning sunlight spilled across the rolling hills of western Kentucky as 20-year-old Coulter Hayes walked through the narrow rows of tobacco growing on the tiny farm that had belonged to his late grandfather. The leaves shimmered with deep emerald color beneath the warm summer sky, but nobody else saw beauty in them. To the surrounding farmers, the crop represented nothing more than an outdated tradition that had long since lost its value. While neighboring farms had converted to corn, soybeans, or commercial livestock, Coulter stubbornly continued planting tobacco on the family's last 12 acres because it was the only thing his grandfather had truly understood. After losing both of his parents in a highway accident when he was 12, Coulter had been raised by his aging grandfather, Everett Hayes, a quiet man whose weathered hands carried decades of farming wisdom. Before passing away from heart failure, Everett had asked for only one promise: never abandon the land simply because other people stopped believing in it. Coulter honored that promise every single morning. Long before the county came alive with the sound of tractors, he walked each row beneath clear daylight, inspecting every leaf, checking every stem, and recording careful notes inside a worn leather notebook that had once belonged to Everett. The notebook contained observations stretching back almost 40 years, describing unusual weather patterns, soil conditions, and occasional tobacco plants that behaved differently from the rest. Most people would have dismissed the scribbled entries as the sentimental ramblings of an old farmer, but Coulter treated every page like priceless scientific evidence. Money grew tighter with every passing season. Bills accumulated faster than crops could be sold. The farmhouse roof leaked each time it rained. The pickup truck barely survived another trip into town. Grocery shopping became an exercise in deciding which necessities could wait until next week. Even so, Coulter refused to complain because he believed hardship did not define a person's future unless they surrendered to it. Unfortunately, the people around him rarely shared that belief. Every sunny afternoon when trucks gathered outside the local grain cooperative, older farmers laughed quietly as Coulter drove past carrying bundles of tobacco leaves. Some shook their heads with pity while others openly mocked him. They insisted he was chasing a dead industry and wasting precious farmland. Several offered insulting prices to purchase his property, believing financial desperation would eventually force him to sell. Their smiles carried the confidence of people convinced they had already predicted someone else's ending. Only one neighbor consistently treated Coulter with respect. A widowed school librarian named Marjorie Sinclair often visited the farm during bright afternoons to deliver homemade bread, gardening books, or simply encouraging words. She reminded him that history was filled with people mocked for seeing possibilities invisible to everyone else. Although she knew almost nothing about farming, she possessed something far more valuable: unwavering faith in another human being. Hidden within Everett's notebook was one repeated observation that refused to leave Coulter's thoughts. Every few years, a handful of tobacco plants growing near an old limestone spring displayed extraordinary resistance to disease. Their leaves remained healthy while neighboring plants occasionally struggled. Everett never understood why, but he had carefully marked those locations with hand-drawn maps. Instead of ignoring those mysterious entries, Coulter began studying them with relentless curiosity. Every bright morning he compared leaf textures, measured growth rates, photographed changes, and researched plant biology using free online university publications at the county library. He lacked expensive laboratory equipment, but determination became his greatest resource. He slowly realized those unusual plants produced proteins unlike ordinary tobacco varieties. He had no idea whether the discovery mattered, yet something deep inside urged him to continue investigating. Months passed beneath endless blue skies filled with exhausting labor. While others invested in bigger machinery and larger harvests, Coulter invested in knowledge. He mailed carefully preserved plant samples to agricultural researchers, often receiving polite rejection letters explaining they lacked funding or interest. Most people would have accepted defeat after the 10th rejection. Coulter mailed the 11th sample anyway. Late one crisp autumn morning, a university research laboratory finally responded. A plant biologist named Dr. Rowan Mercer explained that preliminary testing suggested Coulter's tobacco contained an unusually efficient natural protein expression system. In simple terms, those plants possessed characteristics that could potentially help scientists produce complex therapeutic proteins more efficiently than conventional laboratory methods. The discovery required extensive verification, but it was scientifically significant enough to deserve serious attention. Coulter could barely believe the words. He was not suddenly wealthy. He had not discovered a miracle cure. Yet for the first time, someone respected the careful observations that everyone else had laughed at. Researchers began visiting the farm under bright daylight, collecting samples while documenting decades of Everett's handwritten records. Every visit attracted more curious neighbors. The same people who once mocked Coulter now watched silently from across fence lines, wondering why respected scientists kept returning to a farm they had called worthless. Testing continued for nearly a year. Independent laboratories confirmed the unusual characteristics again and again. The rare tobacco variety showed exceptional promise as a platform for producing certain research proteins, opening possibilities for faster and more cost-effective pharmaceutical development. Word quietly spread through scientific circles before eventually reaching one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. Then came the unforgettable morning when a convoy of vehicles rolled slowly down the gravel driveway. Executives, attorneys, agricultural specialists, and research directors climbed from polished SUVs beneath brilliant sunshine. They toured the fields with extraordinary care, examined Everett's notebooks, reviewed laboratory findings, and spoke respectfully about preserving Coulter's intellectual property. Unlike the speculators who had once tried to buy his land cheaply, these visitors recognized that the true value rested not in acreage but in decades of patient observation and responsible stewardship. Their offer left Coulter speechless. Rather than purchasing his farm outright, they proposed licensing the unique plant genetics while funding continued research, protecting his ownership of the land, and creating scholarship programs for rural agricultural science in Everett Hayes's memory. The agreement reached into the millions of dollars, but what moved Coulter most was one simple sentence written near the end of the contract: original discoverer and steward of the Hayes cultivar. For the first time since childhood, tears filled his eyes beneath the warm afternoon sun. News spread across the county faster than harvest season gossip ever had. Reporters arrived. Cameras lined the road. Headlines celebrated the remarkable story of an overlooked young farmer whose persistence had transformed forgotten tobacco into a breakthrough scientific resource. People who had barely acknowledged Coulter months earlier suddenly praised his intelligence and determination. Yet success did not erase old memories. Each compliment reminded him of seasons spent eating inexpensive meals, repairing broken equipment with salvaged parts, and hearing laughter echo across the cooperative parking lot whenever his truck appeared. One afternoon, several of the farmers who had mocked him gathered outside his barn. Their expressions carried embarrassment rather than pride. They admitted they had mistaken tradition for foolishness and poverty for lack of potential. None expected forgiveness. Coulter listened quietly before looking across the fields his grandfather had loved. Everett often said bitterness was like poison poured onto good soil, it harmed the one who spread it more than anyone else. Holding on to resentment would only darken the future he had worked so hard to build. Instead of turning them away, Coulter invited every one of them inside. He announced that part of the licensing income would establish a community agricultural innovation center where local farmers, regardless of age or background, could learn modern research techniques, sustainable farming practices, and scientific partnerships without paying tuition. He wanted struggling families to have opportunities his grandfather never received. Silence filled the barn. Many of those weathered farmers lowered their heads, overwhelmed not by guilt alone but by unexpected grace. Construction began the following spring under endless daylight. The old tobacco barn became classrooms, laboratories, and meeting spaces where experienced farmers worked beside young students eager to combine traditional knowledge with modern science. Everett's notebook occupied a glass display case at the entrance, reminding every visitor that careful observation and perseverance often matter more than expensive technology. Marjorie Sinclair watched proudly as children toured the center during school field trips. She smiled each time Coulter explained that scientific breakthroughs rarely begin inside glamorous laboratories. Sometimes they begin with someone willing to notice what everyone else ignores. Years later, the Hayes Agricultural Innovation Center became nationally recognized for connecting rural communities with scientific research. Young farmers from across the country arrived carrying ideas once dismissed as impossible. Instead of laughter, they found encouragement. Coulter never forgot the difficult seasons that shaped his character. He still walked the original tobacco rows every bright morning, not because he needed the money anymore, but because gratitude grew best where humility remained alive. The fields reminded him that every extraordinary harvest begins with ordinary seeds planted in faith long before anyone else believes they can grow. Before we reach the end of this journey, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment below. Have you ever been underestimated or laughed at for believing in something others called impossible? Your story might become the encouragement someone else needs today. As the afternoon sun settled gently across the hills, Coulter looked over the farm that had once seemed destined for failure. The weathered fences had been repaired. The old farmhouse stood strong again. Children laughed as they explored fields where hopelessness had once taken root. Everett's promise had been kept, not because fortune arrived by chance, but because one young man refused to abandon faith, curiosity, and compassion when the world offered him ridicule instead. The greatest victory was never the millions of dollars or the worldwide recognition. It was proving that kindness could outlast cruelty, forgiveness could heal deeper than revenge, and quiet perseverance could accomplish what pride never could. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that the next person everyone calls foolish may simply be the one who sees tomorrow before anyone else does.